Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we are going to be talking about Ghostbusters Afterlife, the brand new Ghostbusters film that is an actual continuation to Ghostbusters 1 and 2. And to be completely honest, I'm not the biggest diehard fan of the Ghostbusters movie. And if you've seen any reactions from this film from the premiere or any sort of critic reactions, a lot of people are talking about the nostalgia in this movie, and I think I have an interesting take on this film and on this idea of nostalgia because I have no nostalgic connection to this movie. The first time I saw the original Ghostbusters was actually last year during the quarantine, and so I've only seen the original one twice. To be honest, I haven't seen the second one. I have seen the 2016 one, though, and that movie I do think is fine. And I think the original one is really solid. It's a really fun movie, but I don't think it's the greatest thing ever. And so I don't have that sort of diehard connection to this franchise. And so watching this movie, I don't have all that baggage and all that's, bias towards Ghostbusters that's either going to make me hate this movie or love this movie. And so I'm going in with kind of a blind and kind of more objective opinion on this film than I think a lot of Ghostbusters fans have on this movie. And so I walked out of this movie really enjoying it. I thought it was a fun movie. I don't think it's as, incredibly paced and as, invigorating as the first one is. I think that's something that I appreciate more from the first one after watching this one specifically, is because the first one moves. It has such a great pace, it has such a great structure to it, and the leads and the chemistry between all four of the Ghostbusters is so solid in that movie, and those are the type of things that I feel like have some separation in this film. And so I will be getting into spoilers for Ghostbusters Afterlife, so if you have not seen that movie, if you are a fan of Ghostbusters, of course you're going to go see this movie, so I don't have to recommend that to you. But I honestly would highly recommend this movie to people who don't really have a connection to the Ghostbusters, who either watched the first one and didn't really like it too much or didn't really have any connection with it. Maybe if you watch this one to see a new generation's worth of Ghostbusters, I honestly think this movie does a good job at kind of exploring the world without you having any prior knowledge or any diehard knowledge of the Ghostbusters movies. So, sure, you're going to miss some Easter eggs and some things, but the movie does a good job kind of leading you through the story and leading you through all the technology and exactly what things do without, a lot of heavy exposition, because all that is done through either your prior knowledge of the Ghostbusters movies or all through visual storytelling, which is kind of a side effect of not, of relying on past knowledge from Ghostbusters movies. So if you're a brand new fan to the franchise, I think this is a solid one to get into. So spoilers from here on out, and I do actually love the comparison to this movie to The Force Awakens. Now, I don't think this movie's as great as The Force Awakens was compared to the original trilogy of the Star Wars movies, how great of a reinvigoration of the franchise that was, because The Force Awakens had a very fast-paced, tempo to it, and it was very action-packed and very just right into the story, and you're off, you're on the races, and you're just exploring the world of Star Wars and having so much fun in it. This movie takes its time. It's a very slowly paced movie. In the first Ghostbusters, they're busting ghosts 10 minutes into that movie. This movie, you don't really see a ghost for a while. There's a great opening scene with Egon that kind of sets up why they're in this, small town in the middle of nowhere to begin with. And so you're introduced into this world with a great opening scene, and then you kind of slowly introduce yourself and kind of acquaint yourself with the family of this movie, who is the daughter of Egon and the grandchildren of Egon, played by Carrie, Coon, Mckenna, and Finn Wolfhard. And in terms of characters in this movie, I think Mckenna is by far the best character in this movie. Next to Paul Rudd, I think Paul Rudd he's always Paul Rudd in whatever he's in, but I love Paul Rudd, so I really enjoyed seeing him. And especially that dynamic that he has with Mckenna in the first act of this movie, when they're kind of discovering things, and she's, integrated into his, summer school, and, they meet this podcast kid, and those three, when they're testing out the ghost trap, that is a lot of fun when Mckenna and the kid, the podcast kid, go out and they try to bust their first ghost, and they're trying to capture it in the trap all on their own, and they're using the photon thing. All that is great. That entire first part where they're driving the car and, they're racing down the streets in this small town, kind of wrecking everything, destroying everything, that is when I loved this movie the most. But that doesn't happen for quite some time in the movie. There's a lot of setup, there's a lot of, getting to know these characters, and to be honest, I don't think the movie does the best job at making you care a lot about the characters, particularly with Finn Wolfhard and his love interest character in this movie. Her name was Lucky in the movie. I didn't really care about those two characters too much. I think, their setup, they had some cute moments at a couple parts, but for the most part, the entire time of this, diner that they're in, it kind of feels like wasted time when you could have, had them all together the entire time, bonding as a team, rather than coming together just at the ending of the movie, because it's something that the first Ghostbusters does really well, is all these characters, they already know each other. They already have a dynamic and a rapport with each other, and that is just missing from this movie. And when it comes to Paul Rudd and his, sort of romantic relationship with the mom, Carrie Coon, I actually really enjoyed those scenes, especially because that was in my favorite part of the movie when McKenna Grace and Podcast and Finn Wolfhard are driving the car trying to catch the Muncher ghosts. They're having a little date, they're having little lunch dates, in this little restaurant, and the Muncher flies right in front of their faces and kind of ruins their entire date. That entire sequence I loved. I thought that was the best character stuff in the movie, with the characters kind of bonding with each other through the action of what they're doing. But again, it took a while to get to that point, and I love that mystery and that slow build up to what they're trying to do, but it's very, very different from what the original one did. And so I think that's one thing that you have to keep in mind when you're watching this movie compared to the first one. Is the first one, like I said, has an incredible pace and structure. Their busing goes 10 minutes in. This one takes its sweet old time to introduce you, to reacquaint you with the world of Ghostbusters. Even though we just had a Ghostbusters movie like 5 years ago, you're trying to reintroduce everybody into this world. And so that's why I say that this movie is probably great for people who have never seen Ghostbusters, because it does take that time to introduce you to those things. When McKenna Grace is, kind of communicating with Egon, him as a ghost, when they're playing chess and they're, going into his little laboratory and he's teaching her how to fix the machine and all these different things. I did enjoy all that, but again, it does take its time. And once you get to the final act of the movie, yes, there are a ton of references to the original Ghostbusters. There's a ton of Easter eggs everywhere in this movie. I know there's a few points where, again, I'm not the biggest Ghostbusters fan, so I didn't catch all these Easter eggs. And there's some moments where I was like, okay, this is an Easter egg. I don't get the reference completely because, I've only seen the original one twice, so I don't know every small little detail in the original movie, but I know that was an Easter egg. I just didn't, make that connection. And so that nostalgia, none of that nostalgia really hit me. Where it did hit me, though, was in the final act, especially with the way that things go out with, the villain of this movie being the same villain as the first one, and even the CGI of the little dog demon things. It felt very practical. It looked very practical. It looked very honest to what it was in the original movie, which I really appreciate. Even the way that when Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon are standing at the feet of the temple and they're transformed into the dogs when the lightning hits them, that transformation really does look exactly like the original 80s movie. And when it comes to nostalgia, I think there's two types of it. There's a type of nostalgia that is nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. It's only there to get a reaction from an audience. It's there to kind of carry the movie on its shoulders, and I don't think that's what this movie does necessarily. I get why some people think that, but I think it's not quite as good as the other type of nostalgia, which is the nostalgia that feels earned, the nostalgia that feels like you waited that long to see this thing and you've built up a movie on its own and now you can have fun with it, which I think Dr. Sleep does brilliantly with that movie. I think the nostalgia in that movie in the third act is all built up because there's 2 hours of that movie that is all completely new and inventive. And I think this movie has some new and inventive things in the first half of this movie when it tries to, build these characters out rather than you just throwing everything together like the first movie did. Although I don't think that works as well as they wanted it to, I do think the nostalgia on this movie is not just nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. And I'll be honest, even though it was extremely convenient that the original Ghostbusters show up at the end of this movie at the perfect time for them to show up, again, very, very absurdly convenient, but honestly, I had fun with it. Their banter, again, what was missing with, the group of kids in this movie, that kind of rapport that they all had, all four of them together, you get that with the Ghostbusters again. I think they did a good job at having them pop up last minute, being the ex machina save the day type thing, even though I was worried for a second that they're just going to show up and fix everything and, all the characters that we've come to know for the past 2 hours didn't really have a moment to save the day. I was wrong about that while I was watching the movie. I'm so glad that I was wrong about that because, they show up and they help, try to stop Gozer from, taking or destroying the world, whatever Gozer's trying to do. And so I was really worried for a second, but, Gozer knocks them down and McKenna Grace gets back up and she helps them and they all work as a team. You see Egon's ghost helping them out at the end of this movie, which I think there's a moral question to be said about, bringing dead actors back to life, to reprise their role in a movie however many years later. Like they did that in Halloween Kills with Loomis, and now they're doing it here. I don't know if it was actually a practical mask like it was in Halloween Kills or if it was CGI. Either way, it looked incredible. I don't know if it was recast either because I don't really know what Harold Ramis looked, that amount of time after the original movie, because the only thing I think I've seen him in is the original Ghostbusters. So I don't have that frame of reference, but I will say that the visual effects of whatever they did, the magic that they did to bring him back, looked really good. It's just there's that moral question of, they focus too much on whether they can. They didn't think of whether they should, do that in the first place. So I don't know, but I had fun with that reveal of having them all, that frame of all four of them standing next to each other, and all the original cast is looking over at Egon's ghost like, oh my gosh, this is actually happening. I enjoyed all of those little tiny moments in this movie. So overall, as somebody who has never been crazy about the Ghostbusters movies, I think this movie is exactly what I thought it was going to be, especially from what I heard from other critics saying that it's a giant nostalgia trip, but without the nostalgia, it's a really good introduction to the Ghostbusters to a new generation. I think that's what this movie does really well. Even with the Star Wars movies, I would recommend to people who had never seen a Star Wars movie before, maybe start with The Force Awakens. Maybe start at that point and maybe go back and watch the original trilogy, just because, maybe that older style of movie is going to, turn people away in certain ways. Some people, some newer audiences, as much as that pains, me as a giant Star Wars fan of, loving the originals, part of me thinks that some newer audiences are going to enjoy these newer movies more. And I think that's the case with this new Ghostbusters movie. I don't think it's nearly as good as the first movie. I don't think that margin or that gap between, the quality between the first one and this one are as wide as, some people are going to say. Honestly, I think they're pretty close in quality to each other. But that first one, like I said, the original Ghostbusters has such an invigorating pace. This movie didn't have that. This movie had a slower pace, a more introduction into that world that I did appreciate, although I don't think it was as successful with building characters as I think the movie wanted it to. But overall, I thought this was a fun experience. I really loved the scenes where it was really, having fun with the characters, busting ghosts. I really did enjoy the third act. That emotional moments with Egon and McKenna Grace and all that stuff was really, really cool to see. Seeing Bill Murray on screen is always a delight. And honestly, my greatest connection with Ghostbusters is from Zombieland and Bill Murray's cameo in that movie. So those are my thoughts on Ghostbusters Afterlife. I'm really curious to see what you guys thought of this movie, so definitely comment down below whether you thought this movie was worth, existing, I guess. I think that's a good way to frame it. I think there is a reason for this movie to exist, other than, just a cash grab or whatever that you might think that the 2016 one was, which I think yes and no, that is the case with that one. But this one feels like it has an emotional draw to even exist in the first place. So thanks everybody for watching this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video and share it to anybody you think might like this channel. I'd really appreciate that as well. So thanks guys for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.